see some new faces, so you're especially welcome. Can I just invite you to be on the mailing list of the Center for Latin American Studies, so you will join us in other events in the future. I would also like to thank our faculty affiliates, and first and foremost, Professor Frank Wallach, the whole group working Professor of Commodity Price Studies in the Department of Economics at Stanford University. Frank, thank you for being here, and moreover, for sponsoring Professor Street's visit. We, as an IDP, an interdisciplinary program, rely on the collaboration of faculty across departments. So I'm very grateful. I'll also pre-announce we are going to have a Venezuela and Cuba themed event organized by Professor Michael. Michael, would I ask you for a quick pitch so folks know that this is happening?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so on February 25th, a good colleague of mine, Gabriel Hetland, he's a sociologist expert on Venezuela and Latin America in general, coming back to speak about the context and sort of the prospects in wake of the intervention in Venezuela, and also its impact on Cuba. So I'll speak on that as well.
Thank you very much. Professor Hetland has spoken for the center previously, and he has a book with Columbia University Press on U.S. Latin America relations. No?
It was actually a sociological study of Venezuela and Bolivia. But he's interested in those issues too.
Yeah. So if you're all in the mailing list, you'll get to hear more about that. And then we have this custom at the center, which is to invite one of our master students to introduce our students. Thank you both for doing that. I give the floor over to Lucia Huerta. Lucia.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm pleased to introduce Professor Alexandre Street. Professor Street holds a master's and a doctorate in electrical engineering with an emphasis in operations research from the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He's an associate professor in the electrical engineering department of PUC-Rio, where he also teaches in the industrial engineering department and founded the R&D Laboratory of Applied Mathematical Programming and Statistics. The Renewable Storage and Flexibility Research Group for Power Systems Sustainability and M.Sc, an energy tech startup incubated at the university. His work bridges academia, industry, and policy, promoting applied research that connects students with real-world challenges faced by regulators, generators, and large consumers in the energy sector. Professor Street has played a pivotal role in shaping Latin American electricity markets, particularly in the development and implementation of long-term forward contract options, which are now a cornerstone of Brazil's 2004 market reform and a model reference across the region. He has also contributed to major institutional and regulatory modernization efforts, supporting governmental entities in defining new guidelines for managing data, computational models, and software use in price formation and resource planning, topics that constitute much of his research work. Professor Street is a senior member of IEEE and served as an associate editor for its Transactions of Power Systems, Open Access Journal of Power and Energy, and Transactions on Energy Markets Policy and Regulations. He is also a member of the Brazilian Power System Planner Advisory Council, contributing to discussions that shape long-term planning and regulatory strategies. His research spans robust and stochastic optimization, power system economics, planning, and operations. Let's all welcome Professor Street.
Thank you so much for this super nice introduction and for being here. It's an amazing time. I've been here for like 1 month. I started teaching, and Frank is sponsoring me out here, and we have like such a good time with conversations about the energy markets and also how to teach these interesting topics that shape our lives. My talk is gonna be passing through these topics, and I will try to approach how Latin America can try to bring some interesting ideas for the challenge that we are facing now all around the world. And I expect also to show some challenge that we are facing and how I expect to learn from this long history of US, like trying to get the prices right close to operation. So that's what is my Let's see. I think we got it. So just to put in context, that's my lab there in Brazil, in the Catholic University in 2014. We started this in 2010. And since then, we got like many students. We just got this last meeting with like half of the students, but it was already crowded. And after that, this is the three pillars that we try, the main concepts that we try to sustain our things that we do, that we do research in the topics that we are helping the industry to advance. So we do R&D research, and we do the research, apply it to the actual problems that we see in reality, and then we bring these problems to the class. That's what I think is amazing from my university and also Stanford, that the people that are teaching the undergrad people are the ones that are trying to push forward the science. So, and then we contaminate in a good sense the brains with some new ideas there. And for these, we have like after like 10 years we are there, and it's interesting because these two guys here, there were former PhD students and are associate and an assistant professor there in other departments, but also part of the group. So it's very interesting to see these. We get also stories of interesting startups going on from the research that we do that. And I'm here for the next year, for this year, 2026, in the Center for Latin American Studies, and with the Program of Energy and Sustainable Development led by Frank. And what are our goal in this journey here is to, in terms of teaching, is to understand and design the course that will train the future generation of economists and engineers. This interdisciplinary idea is very strong for us to address the future problems and challenges that we will have. And to do that, we got these two courses. The first one is Latin American Energy Markets and Policy that I'm teaching now in winter and the next autumn, and then optimization models for electricity markets in spring. Okay. And our main research topic is electricity market design, which is the subject of this topic. Okay. Great. So now that you know a little bit about me, let's ask for a question. What is the greatest and most complex machine humanity have ever built? Try to guess. You can reply the ones that had access to the presentation. Try to guess, what is the greatest machine, the most complex thing that you have ever seen in your life?
The power grid.
The power grid. That's the best student that we have in class. So the power grid can be, you can see it from the space. No, this is amazing thing, and it's something that you're not aware of it. Okay, you just live with it, but the scale and the integration span continents. It's amazing how billions of devices can be interconnected and working together in real-time coordination. Okay, so if it's interesting because it's almost invisible in the sense that you just notice that when you don't have it. So it works quite well and has a great impact in society. So everything that we do today depends on that. So just stop lights now that we're gonna finish this presentation. Okay, so it's amazing. We get a podcast about these topics. If you like, when you have the presentation, just click there and you're going to see more about this. So the key concepts of this talk is going to be these three. Okay, so I'm going to put it up front so that if something happened and the lights go off, we already understood what we were supposed to understand here. So the first key concept is the unix of electricity markets. So I'm not talking about the power system itself, about the markets, which are basically layers that we are building upon this system that is governed by physical laws. Okay, and this is the struggle. This is the challenge. This will create new things that we will need to address. Okay, and the market depends, because it's on top of this system. It depends on various like local factors. depending on the climate, depending on the political goals, depending on the technology that you have access, the design of this electricity market will be a little bit different. And because of that, there is no electricity market in the world that are the same. Okay, so and this creates many challenges for us. Okay, that's good job for engineers and economists. Okay, the second point is how Latin America is dealing with renewable integration and rapid load growth, which are one of the challenges that we are all facing now, especially with the data centers and the whole thing. Okay, and it has to do with long-term contracts, regulatory frameworks that connects the load growth and the contracts, and the systematic contracting strategy and schemes that we create so that we can build new capacity in time for the load. Okay, and finally, what are we struggling with? Latin America is struggling with some challenges, and most of these challenges are things that US and European Union and all the other countries are like trying to address for many years, and we can learn from that. Okay, great. So jumping to the first topic, let's dive into generation. So prepare yourselves now. You're gonna jump into the incredible world of power systems and electrical generation. Okay, so it's a very interesting thing. So power system is divided like in three main parts: the generation, the guys that are pulling the electrons up there, then the guys that are transmitting, and then the distribution, which is the network that we all see around here. Okay, so these you don't see. These are you only see in the roads. Okay, that's the big towers with just transporting like big chunks of electricity. But how do we produce that? This is a very interesting thing. One guy discovered that if you just rotate a wire, a copper wire, with thin magnets, it pulls the electron. It pulls the electron. It's not that the electron is going up to the U. It's that they pull, one pull the other, then this pull is the force being transmitted. And guess what? If you just pick a bunch of magnets and put a bunch of copper wires there, and you just rotate this inside, you create a lot of pull, a lot of force, a lot of power. And this power can be like supplied by a turbine that can be, for example, fed by water passing through a pipe. Okay, but could also be rotated by a steam heated by some fuel and many times of fuel. So you just learn how you produce electricity with all the sources, depending on the force you're putting to rotate the turbine, you get the different source of electricity, okay? So here's the picture of our main hydroelectric power plant there in Brazil. It's not only Brazilian, it's half Brazilian, half Paraguay, okay? So it's very interesting because it's in the boundary. So Paraguay is for the side, Brazil for this side, it crosses the middle of this, and we built these together. And take a look. We create this is the spillage, this is not the generation, the generation comes from here. And what is interesting in these units is that it has a capacity power for 14 gigawatts. Just to give context, Paraguay doesn't use it, his part. Paraguay has a peak load of around 5,000 megawatts, 5 gigawatts. Okay, so the part that Paraguay doesn't use, we buy it and we consume because our load is much more, like 80 something. Okay, so just to give some context, Portugal, the entire peak load of Portugal is 10 gigawatts. Okay, and with the electricity produced by these units in 2023, during the whole year, the electricity produced during the whole year, we could have supplied the whole world in one day. Okay, so it's a huge thing. It was like one of the three biggest units in the planet. Okay, China is building other that are now monsters of this. Great. So going to transmission. Transmission is another very key aspect of the power system. Not only how to generate, but also how to transmit. For example, transmission is the responsible for us to bring the renewable energy from where they are, because we just don't choose where it's windy, where it's sunny, and where the river pass. Okay, we need to go there, put a power plant there. For example, the power plant could be in Amazon, and there is anyone there to to consume that energy. We need to bring them, okay? So we need to create, let's say in Brazil, for example, we have to harness this potential, we cover the whole Brazil with an electric grid integrated, okay, so that we can use these in many different ways. I'm going to pass through this. So that's an interesting thing, that if you really like renewable and decarbonization, if you really like to go green, you should be very happy with transmission, because transmission are the enablers of a possible sustainable generation in the future. Okay, we need transmission to bring this to the main load centers. Okay, this is going to be key for us. Okay, so that's the thing. Transmission integrates markets. Transmission plays an important role in the market design. Okay, because they are the enablers, they are the substrate of everything. So there is a wave of integration. For example, this is a picture of the European of Europe here, and they are like trying to link all these countries, because then you can reuse the excess of supply of renewable generation in one country to another, and then when you do this, your system gets more robust. Because when you have an outage and you lose one generation here, another one can get into play and supply what is missed. Okay, so transmission also comes with robustness, and it reduces global emissions. Okay, it reduces renewable curtailment. What is the renewable curtailment? It's when you need to cut the generation that could be injected. There is some, but there is no transmission capacity. Okay, so it's becoming a big problem now. So planning plays a major role here, because the timing for building this transmission is 10 to 15 years. So you can imagine you are building something that for the next 10 years will be ready, and 10 years everything has changed. Okay, you discover new technologies. So the planning under uncertainty it's a big deal here. Okay, and that's why that depending on the time, the deep uncertainties that you face and the interdependence that it creates, it's huge. So that the main thing here is that renewables, robustness, all the things that we like depend on transmission, and we need to plan them, because otherwise we won't have a market that is possible to be, let's say, well behaved, because you have like no transmission capacity from one side to another, and we're gonna be like curtailing renewable where we will have like super high prices in another part of the network. So transmission is the key point. And it needs to be coordinated, because it integrates many countries, many regions. Okay, so that's a very important thing. And those are the publications that I've done during this time. For example, this is a very interesting one, in which we face the challenge of how do I plan my transmission and my substation hardening. I can improve, I can robustify some substation so that when an earthquake comes, it doesn't have fall in failure. Okay, but it's interesting, because when you invest this, you change the probability of this failing. So how do you create a mathematical model that you're minimizing the expected probability of the expected outage, for example, that depends on the probability, but if you change the probability, it changes the whole situation. So it's a very complex mathematical model. It was published in this paper recently. So great. That's the first part, where we understand the power system and its complexities. Okay. Let's see the common challenge. This challenge that all the systems have. Okay. We got this trilemma. I think this depicts well, at least the basics of the problems. Okay. And this trilemma that has to do with affordability. We always want affordable energy. Okay. Why? Because just wait for a crisis that you're gonna see. Why? The price you're gonna pay is gonna skyrocket, and these, like, if you see, for example, after the war in Ukraine, the European electricity price went like super high. And what happened is that we created a lot of pressure in the inflation. And this unfolds in many political spheres and at the end of the day in lives. Okay, so you bankrupt people, you bankrupt some companies, you finish some jobs and you finish some good ideas. So all economies rely on energy. And interesting, these lessons learned, this paper in energy economics here, it was like proposing some ideas to protect the system against this crisis. And guess what? The same thing that we're going to be showing that we have been doing in Latin America for some years. It's very interesting connections. Okay. And another very interesting thing is that there is no such a thing as a rich country with low energy, okay, low consumption. So consumption and poverty, they are tight related. Okay. So another thing that we want from a power system is not only affordable power system, but a decarbonized power system. We don't want to be dirty, okay? We need to give a better future for our children. So we are concerned with this. So renewables are playing a quite good job in this matter. If you go comparing power system with the other industry, transportation, other sectors, transportation, district, they are doing some quite well, but power system are the leaders. They really can reduce, they really can adapt and reduce. They have shown this movement, okay? So, but again, to do that, we need renewables. And to put renewables, what do we need? Transmission. And transmission is capital intensive, okay? And capital intensive, I say it's $1 billion investments to put the transmission from one side to another to bring these potentials. And we also need storage, also something that is capital intensive. So if we need these, we come back to the first point, that is, then we don't have affordability. It's gonna increase the cost. So how we manage this situation like a short blanket, okay? We need to address this. And one way to address this is integrated planning. So you do your planning correctly. You do your plan. Correctly is a strong word because nothing is correct in the sense that you don't know the answer for everything. But you can do a good job. You can do the best practice. You can understand what at least what are the lessons learned. Okay. And in this sense, because you're facing all this integration, because power systems are getting more and more integrated, because we need transmission to bring not only the renewable, but also to provide resilience to power systems, we need more software, more development and softwares. And the softwares, not only in the planning, but also in the operation, so that we can internalize into the markets the physical parts of the system that really matters for showing to the agents the scarcity that we are facing, so that they can the generators and consumers can reveal their willingness to supply or to change their consumption accordingly. Okay, so the creation of a market is to understand what are the pains of the system there, and try to create some connections between the physical world with the economical world, so that the scarcity of some resource, the scarcity of some technology appears here, and then the agents can provide the solutions based on the prices, okay? And that's the challenge. That's the challenge, okay? Great. So what if we don't do that? I was just telling to you that it's important for us to plan correctly for the market, okay? We need to plan it to have a market that is like functional. So if we don't do that, we can face really big troubles in the sense that, for instance, a blackout is something that united all of us. Anyone likes blackouts. All countries face terrible situations, and they get together to understand what happens. So, for example, in 2021 in Texas, what will happen is that we have like a super cold winter there. It was like the worst in 72 years. And the thing is that all the gas infrastructure started to freeze together with the wind turbines. And all of a sudden, we lost like a big part of the capacity to supply demand. But guess what? What is terrible, what is bad, can be worse. What happened is that because it was super cold and the gas was like frozen, people started to pick that old electrical heaters, and demand of electricity skyrocketed there. So you got a perfect storm. You have like a shortage of supply and a peak of demand. So blackout, okay, this balance. And this is, and then the planning part. We didn't have in ERCOT too many connections with other states, and this is a planning issue, let's say, okay? Not saying that this would be the solution, but for sure this is part of the picture, okay? And another interesting challenge that we are all facing now is this load growth expected for data centers, okay? So in the last 20 years, US has experienced nearly zero growth in electricity consumption, okay? But now it's expected to go like in rates, like 5.7% in a year. That is like of the order of Latin American countries. Okay? It's almost Chinese rate of growth, okay? So it's a huge movement. And when you start to increase load, you need to increase generation and also the transmission to put this all together. And this cost will be shared among consumers. So it raises many questions about who will be paying for the transmission that will connect these new data centers and for all the reinforcements in the network that we need to do, because there will be like a super power flow going through that direction. We need to reinforce the whole system, not the whole system, but really good part of it to withstand these connections. And these transmission costs are generally shared. So your bill is could get higher because of some data center there. So it started to raise these questions, okay? Great. So we are approaching let's say the half of the presentation here, okay? And let's see how Latin America is dealing with these challenges: affordability, load growth, and integration of renewable. Okay, that's the point here. Let's see how in Latin America we are dealing with these challenges. So just a few numbers before starting. Latin America is composed of many countries, but in terms of GDP, Brazil is one of the first, and directly Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, Chile, Peru, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Guatemala, and Venezuela. And then we finish with 90% of the GDP. Okay, from now on, it's in the other quantiles. Okay, so it's interesting to see that. Let's see how these like main countries are like. How are their generation matrix, so that we can understand where are the challenges and how they deal with that. So one important thing is this big number that I put in center. So we are 61% renewable. Okay, so but this renewable comes from many sources, and the main source is hydro. Okay. So the main renewable source in Latin America is hydroelectricity, but in some of the countries, let's pick Brazil as an example, because it was, like, say, the economy that with the highest GDP. Just for example, the source there could be the renewables there are much higher than this average, okay, in terms of generation. And that's one interesting challenge for us. because we are very renewable, because we are very reliant on hydropower, these phenomena, which are like climate phenomena, climate cycles, and Nino and La Nina, they affect us hard. Okay, so we need to protect against this. Okay, so throughout the years, we have faced many drought seasons, many drought periods that challenge these power systems all around Latin America. For example, in the 82s, for example, in Argentina and Brazil, we faced a terrible drought there, and also there in Colombia in the 90s. And then we went to Brazil and Chile here, affected not only at the end of the 90s, but also here in the 2010, 13. It was a big crisis in Brazil. It needed the intervention of the government at that time. So it really affects us in a major sense. Okay, great. So now I expect that you are already understanding that because Latin America has its own challenge, its own resource availabilities, the electricity market design there is going to be different from the electricity market design that we see, for example, in US or in Europe. Okay, so main concepts here. The electricity markets are designed to address the most relevant yet specific challenge of each system. Because if we have if you have a lot of hydro there, our market design will try to create prices that reflect the scarcity of water. Okay, so I'm not sure what the amount of water that I will have like in 6 months, but I'm very sure of the amount of water I'll get from this river in the next hour. So you should be expecting that our monthly, yearly prices are well developed, and our very short-term prices not that much. Okay, because we are limited in energy, in effort, so we are trying to derive a electricity market that is prone to resolve a given scarcity problem. Okay, and because each country or state in the case of US or is quite divided by states in terms of design, faces its own climate, its own resource availability, as well as its own historical history, culture, and political goals. No two electricity markets in the world are the same. Okay, so we are coming back to these now with some background. We are seeing that not only climate, not only resource availability, but also culture. Okay, I was in a round table in the IEEE conference, and it was very funny because we were discussing how batteries should be handled by the system operators. And it was very interesting to see because there were people from Texas and people from Sweden in the same room. And the guy said, "Yo, don't touch my battery." Okay, yeah, I got the prices, and I got these, and I got that, and it's fine. It's fine. It's a choice. And the other people say, "No, but we need to optimize this together in order to integrate all the uses that we can extract. But we can do this by prices." Yes, but there are some externalities. So future. That's the way we think, and this shapes the way we design the markets. I expect that you already understood that the markets there are completely different from the markets here. Okay, in this discussion, right? Perfect. And this is a very nice say from Frank that's understanding the incentives created by these differences in the market designs is essential to design a reliable, low-cost, low-carbon electricity supply. Because when you design the market, what you are expecting? When you design the market, you're not expecting a given outcome. You are expecting the correct incentives to be passed and let the agents to resolve the problems. If there is some scarcity, the price is going to increase, and then people will understand how they will figure out how to supply here. So I'm not as a system operator trying to devise all the solution. No, you got to put batteries here. You got to put a hybrid power plant with wind and solar. No. That's your problem. The price is telling. The value is this. Whatever you can come out with this, be my guest. Supply it. Okay? So the beauty of the market is that you decentralize the innovation. You decentralize the force of strive, the force of the society to resolve and to profit it and to have money for this. Okay, great. So these are squared here because they are very important concepts. So a very important disclaimer, because now we're going to jump in how we are dealing in Latin America with the solutions of some of the challenges. There is no such a thing as best market design. There's no such a thing. Okay, so what we have is better designs. We know what is not working, and we know what worked better than the other. Okay, and there are lessons learned too. Okay, but the best one, hardcore to know, and probably there is no such an answer. And why is that? Markets are constantly evolving. It's a work in progress. And with these topics here, you can guess why, an answer for this. Why is that happening? Because why markets are always changing, and you should think of them as something that should be changed along the time. Why is that? One point in the grade. Tell me. Politics is one. Politics is always change, correct?
Yes, well, even for example, like very recently, we have PE trying to some states withdraw from this pool. It's something political. It's not
so political goals, they change. Okay, another thing that changes, and that
Supply and demand.
Another thing, climate is not changing.
Yeah.
Okay, technology. It appears that technology. 50 years ago, solar panels were not that. Didn't have this cost that we have today. Batteries even worse. Okay, so suddenly appears something new. So because each country and state has its own climate, own availability of resources, future, political goals, and technology, we have different market designs, and the market designs change according to this. Okay, great. So we need to think in markets as something that should be revised periodically, not every day, not every year, but like in periods of time that we see some big changes. Okay, we need to understand that this happens. So we're approaching the end now. Brazil, Chile, Colombia, all the Latin American countries, they are like rich in hydro. Okay, so for example, in Brazil, we have more than 10 river basins, and we organize them with a different, like we have different like weather patterns, and we organize them in different cascades. And this cascade, they are like, they have different ownerships. Okay, so a hydropower plant here owned by CEMIG, it's upstream to the furnace one. And then there are many others of owners like pile up in this cascade, and the decision that one takes of if I turbine or generate with water or not will affect the decision of the downstream companies. So they are all interconnected. There is a interesting, let's say, this externality for when you're designing a market with these type of let's say, interdependencies. Okay, great. So how do we operate a system with such a huge integrated transmission system like Brazil? Okay, with not only a interconnected system in terms of electricity transmission, interconnections, but also with complex cascades and inflows on top of this. Okay, so we have layers of networks, electrical networks, cascade network, okay, and we need to coordinate them optimally, okay, in order to use the resources. And it's very interesting because That's why we have in most of the Latin American countries only one system operator, only one. And this system operator sees the whole country and dispatch and use the resources as a portfolio, passing like from a dry region to a using a wet region, the electricity there, stored there for the drier period, or even passing the water through the electricity system, okay? You produce there is not needed, but you can transmit because you have plenty capacity of transmission. So that's why system operators in Latin America are generally one single entity, okay? That's the ISO, Independent System Operator, okay? And very interesting, we do that to hedge against the need to use fossil fuels, okay? And also to shed load. We don't want, the worst cost that we have in this thing is to curtail load, to not supply, okay? The second worst case is to use like oil power plants that have like very expensive fuels, okay? So we are trying to use at the least, we are trying to manage the system to have the least cost of operation, okay? Great, but another very interesting pattern that we have to do that, we coordinate the whole system and we got the prices through a cost-based assessment. In the sense that there we don't let people to offer how much they are willing to sell. We just have two approach. For thermal plants, we ask, well, what is your contract? How much costs your full? So we have an administrative procedure to see the costs of these units. And for the water, it's much worse. For the water, we need to understand what is the value of the water. And that's tricky because you can just open the gates and let the water flow, and it's going to be like cost zero. But guess what? If we just empty our reservoir, tomorrow I will face a big problem because I will have to start up all the fossil fuel plants. And my cost is going to be like 1,000 reals per megawatt hour, okay? So it's not good. So we need to balance this. So what is the optimal, what is the value of the water? What is the opportunity cost of the water that is stored in your reservoirs? It's the value to avoid a fossil fuel tomorrow. It's the value of avoid a load curtailment in the next years. So you need to stimulate the optimal operation of the system and see if I leak 1 atomic cubic of water for tomorrow, what is the value for the system operator in the future? And with this value, I can balance if I use thermal plants today or if I use water today, okay? So in order to do that, we need a centralized calculation. And that's why there in Brazil, in many countries in Latin America, but Colombia, we don't have an offer-based market. We have a cost-based market, okay? Great. But there is another interesting thing, just to finish this slide, is that in these countries, we have not only a very interesting complementarity between the renewable resources that we have here, so we can really operate them like a portfolio, but we have this complementarity not only through the years as seasons, but also in intraday. You see the generation of wind is very correlated, negative correlated with the solar. So that's why we say that God is Brazilian. Okay? we are such a blessed power system in terms of complementarity, in terms of all these renewable resources, that it really demands us to make the things coordinated, the software thing, the optimization thing. Okay, great. But this creates challenge for us too, and that's when we started to resolve our challenges that are now the challenges that we have today. Okay, the main challenges that we have, like 90% hydro there, and this created a push in the prices. So imagine if you are a generator and facing prices that low because we have plenty of water there, and because we have the prices, we are building the system always to work like with a low probability of not having the water there. So what happens is that most of the time you have a lot of water. And then the marginal cost of having additional water is almost zero. So imagine if you were like a company trying to have like an investment, say, okay, you go to the bank and say, give me $1 billion to build this monster here that will produce electricity, but I don't know when I'm going to be paid because the prices are very low and perhaps I will bankrupt not paying you back. Okay, but if we have a crisis, I can pay you back. So of course they will say no. Okay, so of course that all generators are afraid of these scenarios here of low prices. Okay, the way we plan the system, we build them to be like this. But in the other way around, consumers also are afraid of these super big prices that perhaps can stall when you miscalculate and the prices can be very high. So both have incentives to agree in a forward contract, as we say, okay, to contract in something in the middle, okay? And that's the story of the Latin American countries. We have like implemented many contracts there that provide us with a stable cash flow and reduce the exposure for these volatile type of spot prices that are on the short-term markets. And this also creates very interesting incentives for the consumers because you're there agreeing in a certain amount. And if you then consume a little bit more, then you're going to buy in the spot market. And then if the spot market is saying, no, now it's too high, the price, okay, you should move your load to the price to the periods where it's cheaper, okay? And how did we deal with these load growth rate that we had in, for example, a 5% in the until 2000, 3% there? What we've done is that we created a framework in which all consumers must be contracted, all contracts must be backed by some physical capacity of generation, and with this regulation, we create a link in terms of load growth and capacity to supply it with certainty. Okay, all consumers need to be contracted. All contracts must be backed by some physical generation. Then all consumers are backed for some good generation, to like reliable generation to supply them. And this was the main thing that we implemented with. We were pioneers in structuring these systematic contracting schemes through auctions. And these auctions were organized there, not only in Brazil, but in Chile, in many other countries, in the following way. Every year, you have, like, for example, 3 types of auctions. We have auctions for 5 years ahead, then you can build a hydropower plant. It takes 5 years. Then you have a 3 years ahead, then you can build a thermal power plant. And then 1 year ahead, then you can adjust. If you are expiring contracts or like finishing, and you can recontract your generation. Okay, so finishing here, this is just to show that we, along the time, it's going well. We have, like, since 2005, we have put more than 100 gigawatts of contracted technologies, also for transmission. Okay, we have planning these, and we have running some auctions for the people to buy, to build and operate these. And we have been shown, like, very interesting discounts in the auctions at the end of the auctions. So it's something that is working, okay? And I will just finish here with the challenges, because now I've just shown you that load growth we are dealing with systematic contracts, and the uncertainties of the prices due to the renewables, we are dealing with contracts. So we are putting contracts with a systematic scheme of contracting generation, then you can supply a rapidly growing demand, okay? The challenges, may I have 5 minutes more? just finish, 2 minutes? Okay, so the challenges. For a long time, we have paid attention too much in the long term. And now we are facing some very interesting challenges because the short-term prices are not reflecting the true reality of the physics there. So when we flooded the system with renewables, and we have done this mainly by subsidies. Okay, we have been giving these sources a lot of discounts and waivers in tariffs. They are getting to the market, and we were not prepared for this intermittence in the intraday. And the thing that is happening there is that we are not being able to absorb them. And these are the increasing rates of spillage, of renewable spillage, of curtailment. We are cutting, we're not like taking advantage of this. Okay, so that's the last slide. And I just want to put to you that in US, we have this long-standing effort of getting prices right, the short-term price. Okay, and what we've done is we internalize the constraints so that price reflect the real operation. But then we are struggling here in US with the high shares of intermittent renewables and low growth with AI data centers. But if we move to Latin America, we have this long history of trying to ensure long-term supply adequacy with the presence of renewables and rapidly low growth. And we have been addressing these with long-term contracting mechanism and a system-wide infrastructure planning. Okay, but now we are facing precisely what US know how to do, or is trying to do for a long time, the short-term price not reflecting the real time. So I think this is a really good time for us to have a good conversation between Latin American and US experiences. Okay, I'm sorry for the late timing here.
Thank you very much. Would you like me to moderate? Would you like to field your own questions?
I'd be my guest. You choose. I'm here for the students and let them ask.
Yes, maybe let's prioritize students. And I have the benefit of having the questions. Just so everyone knows, this is part of a class, like 100. And we have questions from way in advance. So I want to highlight two questions, if I may. One from Lisette Montañez Hurtado and one from Paul Louis. Paul Louis, are you here? Paul? No? Okay, I'll have to relay that then. Lisette, would you mind asking one version of your first question?
Yes, I wanted to ask who are the individuals with powerful interests that would oppose a flexible market-driven energy system? Or who might
There was opposing.
if there was, yeah, opposing.
So, first thing is that we have a status quo, and changing status quo is always difficult. Okay, because there will be winners and losers. Okay, so the opposers are always the ones that are going to be like losing something. So when we talk, we are not at that point. At least I'm talking about in Brazil, for example. You're not in that point of trying to push hard an agenda of flexibility in the way it should be, like we should be doing, like approximating the prices to the reality. We are not at that point, okay? But what we are doing actually, we are trying this challenge of the flexibility, the loss of flexibility came because we flooded the system with subsidies for certain point, for certain sources, okay? But what is happening is that people doesn't want to give away the subsidies. They were supposed to finish, and guess what? They don't want it, okay? So the opposition comes from the people that doesn't want to give up from the subsidies. And there is also another interesting thing is that when you take out these, you can say, okay, there's a political thing. Oh, you are not supporting these sources. And guess what? These sources are the renewables. And the renewables are good for us. We all agree that we want more renewables, but at price, at which price? And that's the point. Okay, so there is a struggle there in Brazil. There is an excess of supply, okay, and there is this push towards more subsidy, continuing the subsidies that for some source that is just not needed anymore in the current situation. Okay, so it's a really tricky thing. Okay, it's political, that goes to the Senate, let's go to all the discussions there with the politics. And it's hardcore, it's big money involved. Okay?
Other questions from students? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I also have a copy of all of the questions from the students, so I was gonna bring Paul Louis question, and my question was kind of similar. So you talk about sort of the decentralizing the innovation. So I was wondering how will that account for accessibility of energy, especially in Latin America, the power outages that we're talking about are not spread evenly, right? Like the access to energy in Latin America is very uneven. So I'm kind of wondering within your research, how do you envision equitable access to these renewables energy resources?
Yeah, most of the outage that you are saying about is not outages on the transmission level, or more in the distribution level. Okay, and the distribution level is another discussion. And it's a big discussion because it doesn't have too much of market. It's much more centralized within that each distribution company. Okay, and what happens there, that you're right, if you go to the poor countries, to the poor part of the country, for example, the distribution is worse. If you go to the richer part, it's much better, much more reliable. For example, transmission, the distribution lines are underground, so there is no trees touching on them, and we don't have like that much of failures. So how do we do that? It's a big question. It's a big question because, for example, in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, we have some part of the city that have more than 50% of stolen energy. So how do you build and like remunerate a system, a transmission system that is just stolen away? Okay, so there are places that you just cannot enter there, and then you need to share this cost because we are providing. So there are some nice policies now that say, okay, we're gonna reduce the price of electricity up to zero, so you don't have any more like interest in. We call this cats. Okay, you don't need to do any cats anymore, just to plug in without the meter. Okay, and then when you try to bring the state within this, so I'm trying to bring the idea that the state need to comes into these places with not only electricity but water and all the infrastructure, so that you can provide more services, so that the services are worthwhile paying and everything arranges as it should. Okay, so I don't have a real answer to this, but what I see is that we need to organize better our society and our state and our first infrastructures, and how we deal with these situations with the favelas and all the things there, so that we can put everything in perspective and be paying what they should be paying, and use the policies that we want to use to make it affordable for people that doesn't have that capacity to pay, because they need. And if one thing is very important, if you provide electricity, if you provide infrastructure, that region strives, that people like have better health, they have better business, and everything improves for society. So there is this exchange. Okay, it's not an easy task.
Other questions from Paulo, please.
Yes, going back to this short run signals, which are very important. Now in many countries, I think Brazil is also it's happening in Brazil as well. You have a lot of industrial customers. They write their own contracts with power plants, and there you can have as much flexibility as you want, right? You can keep the short run signal if you want. Typically, they don't. They want to have very stable prices. I understand residential consumers in Brazil, in Chile as well. We only face these long-term prices, right? We don't react to these short-run prices. So, but the ones that could, they don't want to.
Sure.
This industrial customer. So how do you see how you handle that? I mean, people want to have stable prices. both industrial and residential by construction. But at the same time, you want this short-run signal in order to manage, scarcity better, as you said, the price of water and all that. So what's the solution for that?
The good news is that we already had the solution. We are not putting these in the correct perspective, in the sense that the solution for this is a contract. If you establish a contract with the generator and you agree that, for example, that's what happens in Brazil a lot and also in Chile. If your load varies, the contract will vary together with your meters. Okay? So if you decrease your load because you're just give vacations for everyone in your industry, your contract goes to zero. And when you come back, it goes up to there. So you're paying a fixed price. But guess what? The generation needs to be able to supply this way. Okay? The generation will be supplied for the grid. The generation, if the generation agrees with that, he will be facing the spot prices. He will be buying and selling all the things that he should, because of the difference between the contract and the generation. For example, if I agree with you that when your load decreases, my contract decreases, okay, now you decrease your load, I'm a generator, I'm selling this in the spot price. So if the spot price is zero, that's my bad, that's my problem, okay? And then it opens a space for the trading companies, which are the intermediary people that are buying and selling and taking the risks for this, okay? So I just don't see any problem in the sense that if you want to pay a fixed tariff, there will be a design of contract that provides you with that, but that will be with a cost, okay, an extra cost, okay? So we have the mechanisms.
We have, but the demand is not going to react much. This is what I'm saying.
No, and if you give this type of contract, it will react even less.
Right.
Do you agree? So when you have a fixed quantity contract, then you start to see the demand response. For example, if you were a industrial consumer and you contract with me at 100 megawatts, and for some reason you want to increase your consumption, you will think twice if you're going to increase these during the sunset when the prices are peaking. Okay, you will be better off to bring your industrial production to the time where there is excess of solar generation when the prices are very low, and then the excess of your contract you will be purchasing in zero spot price. Okay, so then you have all the incentives to react. The design of the contracts. Okay, as far as I know, in Chile, all the contracts with distribution companies, they are they follow the law. Okay, so generation are taking the risk. Am I saying correct?
Yeah, this is with the distribution company.
Yeah,
So
distribution
that's
company.
from
The industrial companies, they can choose. Okay, you can choose.
So do you take into account that many Latin American governments subsidize consumption, how that would affect all that you are saying about contracts? For example, in Mexico, except from the DAC tariff, all the other tariffs are subsidized, so people pay 50% or less of what they should be paying in a spot price. Will that affect this contract that you are proposing?
Let's, as a good professor, let's give you back the question. So what would happen with the other consumers? Someone's gonna pay this bill, correct?
Yeah.
Who? The others that are not subsidized.
But
for example, for example, suppose you and me are the only two consumers.
Yeah.
You are subsidized in 50% of your load. We have the both loads, so my bill will increase of 50% because I will be paying for you. Someone needs to pay. In the end, everything goes to the consumer. Someone needs to pay, right?
usually this is outside of
the market. Exactly. It's not spot prices. It's just a bill that I received. Your tariff is that from the market plus these extra out of the market costs here.
Okay.
And then my bill gets higher. And that's what's happening. We are putting a lot of subsidies for the industrial consumers, for example, to migrate from the distribution companies where they have the generator there built for them, because when they migrate to this free environment, they have a discount with renewables. Guess what? The discount goes to everyone else. And then we create this paradox of excess of supply and high tariffs. Okay, because we are spreading the things that the others are not paying. Okay,
So then,
that's signals.
so then the solution shouldn't be just liberalize the prices for residential customers. So in line with.
No, I'm not sure if he was proposing this. I think he was just
To
asking.
react more to the short-term prices.
This is a big jump.
Okay.
Okay, going to put the residential consumers into the spot price,
Okay.
it's a big jump. Okay, there are some systems that provide this type of tariff, but you also need other type of tariffs that are more stable. For that, if you ask to me, you want to see the spot price? No. Did you see that when the price went down, went up there, you are killed and you're finished. Okay, so we need people that knows how to handle this. Okay. It's better you to coordinate.
Okay, please.
Thank you so much for this very engaging crash course on energy markets. So I'm very interested in the political barriers. So you talked a little bit about incentives, and I want to push back and ask you a little bit more about like the trilemma of decarbonization, stability, and affordability. Is it the case that politicians are equally considering decarbonization in this equation? I'm thinking about electoral cycles, they're much shorter than the cycles that you mentioned, building, investing in 15-year infrastructure, in expanding transmission lines. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, like, is it the case that the political barrier is there in terms of lack of incentives for investing?
No, so you are describing a very relevant problem of the reality of how the things are done, not in the blackboard, in the reality. So we have these different timings, different forces shaping the market design, shaping the thing. So the time for building a line is like 10 to 15 years. But to start a study to do that, it sometimes takes like 5 years. Okay, and you need to have an orientation for this planning thing. Okay, but guess what? It's political, because all these agencies are like driven by some. It's not always independent in this way. Okay, so you have the timing of the politicians. We have the timing of the society, because you will always feel the problems of a like badly designed system years ahead. Okay, so you need to feel this, and then we get angry, and then we complain, and then we need to change the mind of politicians, and then we need to start to study, and then we need to plan, and then 15 years after it comes. That's the timing for these things. Okay, so I agree with you. There is a timing for politicians. There is that's not in pace with the timing of the things that we do. And when we are lucky, we can pick the cheese and see the hole, and we can see the other side, and that's when we grab and we make the changes, and then we have the opportunity. So the opportunity to make the correct thing that we know that are better than the ones that we're doing, they are very rare. Very rare. Okay.
I'm going to propose that we take 3 questions so that you can answer them
I
perhaps.
can be here all day long. So
I think we all want to try. I have 3 people, you in the back, then Christian, then Professor Wolf. Yeah, for this round. Yeah.
Okay. Hello to everyone. I'm Jitendra Kati from Nepal, Tribhuvan University, Nepal. Actually, thank you, Professor, for a very good and insightful presentation.
thank you for being here.
Yes. My question is just, can only the market design alone solve the regional price disparity, though it needs a multi-billion-dollar first? And one more thing is, As you shown, the price, the redeemer, placed by this, the Brazil has a significant capacity of producing energy, though the regional imbalance remains. I was in Brazil last year. Regional imbalance, mostly the northern part is more demanding or deficit of the energy than the southern part. What may be the cause? Is that because of the transmission challenge or other market rules that limiting the optimal power flow?
Let's hear from Christian. I'll be collecting the questions. I'll help you remember. Yeah.
It's gonna be another question?
3 in a row, is that okay?
No, wait, I
nothing
can't
to-
handle.
no, no,
I need to be one of them. My memory is scarce. It was already hard discussion.
All right.
So, let me know if I understood correctly. So I will pick from the end, okay? So you're saying if the scarcity that you saw in Brazil has to do with the transmission. I'm not sure if I pick the whole picture of your question, right? Can you just
Yeah, so I just want to say there is a power imbalance between the regional power imbalance.
In
Is
Brazil?
that because in Brazil too,
about power imbalance?
yeah, some part is a deficit of the power
Mhm.
and some may have some surplus.
Okay.
Suppose
Okay, supply and capacity.
yeah, supplying
Okay.
capacity. Is that due to the transmission or the other market factors?
Yeah, now I get it. I'm sorry. Now I get it. So the supply, the generations are built according to the market force, let's say. Okay, we don't plan them. We just auction the contracts and they install. Okay, so then what happens is that perhaps you will install where the sun shines better, where there is more wind. And guess what? This is in the northeast part of Brazil. Okay, but the big load is in southeast part. Okay, and that's why we created that massive transmission system there to bring this to the correct place. Okay, but you're right in the sense that if you build too much, transmission cannot be in pace with the development of this generation. It has been the case. For example, in Chile, we built a lot of solar generation in the Atacama Desert, like thinking that the transmission would come. But guess what? Transmission always delays. Always. You never see a transmission, a big transmission getting into the schedule. Okay. So what happened is that you were stuck there with a lot of capacity without being able to bring it to here. Okay. So transmission is one of the main sources, and the timing of transmission in the whole thing matters a lot. Okay. Kristen.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. It's really interesting and engaging. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about like the inequalities that the market designs might cause, and particularly like about the prices. Like you mentioned that there is something like the real price of energy, but I wonder what is capturing that price, because for example, the cost of building certain hydroelectrics or infrastructure projects might have costs that are very difficult to quantify. Like for example, water or the diversion of a river can have consequences or costs that are very difficult to quantify. In Latin America, even many people would dispute that water is a commodity, that is something quantifiable. In Colombia, for example, the building of hydroelectric has also caused like displacement of people. So yeah, I wonder like what is capturing the price and how certain inequalities might appear by these market designs.
Great question. One thing to start the answer is if you integrate the system is integrated, okay, with full capacity, not full capacity, but very well integrated. There is no differences in the sense that the prices are there for every node according to their value to the system, in the sense that if you increase the load in a given part of the system, you're gonna have an increased cost. And this is defined the short-term price, but this is not the price that you as a consumer pays. You as a consumer will pay much more the tariff that is below the distribution system that is contracting here and doing all these sort of calculations to understand what are the prices that is going to be facing in the wholesale market, so that they can pass a distribution through the distribution a tariff to you. So whenever you integrate, you have more equality. Okay, so transmission brings more equality in this sense, because it provides the source of a very cheap resource up there in the Northeast, come to the South, and everything is well connected. And then you can face prices all over the country that are almost the same. And it happens in Brazil, most of the time, the prices in all of the country are the same, okay? Because we are integrated. But if we go to a country that every state is like disconnected, okay? And we don't operate this as a single power system, then you can have these differences. And then you can have because of the wholesale prices, you can have very different tariffs, okay? So one important thing to let you know is that transmission is the way to reduce these inequalities. Okay? When you integrate, you can use the resources in a better way, and then you can in some source reduce the inequalities on that. But in this distribution level, no. Okay? In the distribution level, then you have differences, and these differences comes from the way that company is run. Okay, and then you can have differences for this. For example, if you have too much stolen energy in that region, but is the case in Rio and Amazon, then you're gonna face a very high price there, because then you're gonna be pro rata the energy that was stolen for the others, and guess what? The denominator increases because the denominator decreases, and then the tariff grows. Okay, and then there is an inequality. Okay. You see, it's a complicated thing. But one key aspect is transmission, to integrate and put everybody together. Okay, that's the thing.
But do those prices like capture what you call externalities? But that my point is like some of those externalities, how do you quantify that? Like
the water thing, for example, the different uses of water, for example, are some of them.
Right, but there are also like lives of people or something. Like how you put a price on that? Like how you say, well, these cost. I mean, building this infrastructure will cost, I don't know, certain lives, or because
what you're saying about the environmental constraints, okay? Is that correct?
Part of it is environmental, yeah, but part of that is also social, or disrupting certain social dynamics, or disrupting, yeah. My point is like, it's difficult to quantify that, isn't it?
No,
like,
sure, it's a challenge. For example,
how the price captures that or does not capture?
It's research, in the sense that we need to understand how do you like compensate for something. For example, in Itaipu, we have there a amount of money that is growing, okay, just to compensate the cities in around the reservoir, okay, that were affected by this. And sometimes you change the course of the rivers. Sometimes you change the way the water is used. So there are many thousands, and that's why we stopped in 2010 building new hydros. We just stopped. And then I bring you the opposite question. What would be the cost of stopping using our cheapest resource? That we are putting infinite cost in the environmental here, and there is a manageable cost. We can calculate cost for electricity, but we don't know how to calculate this cost that we are talking about. So this is a very important thing to understand. Okay, so how further can we go? Otherwise, not that further, but nothing is too much too.
So we'll have one final question of Professor Wolf, and then I'll do closing remarks, okay?
Oh, thank you. This is really fascinating, and really good for me, non-engineering, non-economic. I think you really made it very clear. So one country I've not seen here that I kind of was surprised is the greatest builder of renewable energy, and that's China. With a very different political system, authoritarian, they can have long-term planning, you know, without too much.
And they do have
political opposition and so forth. And also Brazil's now biggest trading partner. And I just wonder, like, how does China come into the equation in terms of either being an example or being a supplier or investor in this renewable energy transition? And you know, I don't know how much you've studied about it as you have with the United States, but it'd be interesting, you know, to compare and contrast. I think just because China now plays such a big role in Latin America.
Well, far as I know, China has invested a lot in Brazil, mainly in transmission system, for example. Okay, so it's a very important part of the development of the electrical power system in Brazil. It's in foreigners investing in us, and one of the things that they are investing a lot, China is investing a lot, is transmission. Okay, so in some sense they are suppliers and also now players, because the transmission is part of the game. Okay, they run this auction, they receive like a stable revenue to build and operate during like 30, 50 years. Okay, so they are there. We also can have generators. We don't have any barriers for like foreigner investments. Okay, so I think that's pretty much the case where not only China but many other investors could enter there and participate in the market, not only in the transmission but also in generation. Okay, so I think it's pretty much the case that is happening now. It's not that far, okay, but because Brazil is very specific and you can lose money if you get into the wrong place. But for example, transmission is the most stable revenue that you can have in the electrical sector in Brazil. Okay.
But is China an example too in some ways? I mean, just because they can
An example of how we do
plan.
I'm not aware of any like super study that we have been basing our stuff there from China, because we have to build up all this planning thing like from our own. So I think we developed this there, and now we export this technology of like calculating water values and like optimal planning. Okay, but I think I'm not aware of any like studies coming from China. Not they don't do, they actually do. Okay, but it's not this exchange is not that much from my knowledge. Okay, from what I know.
Thank you. Before we thank our speaker, I'm going to take the podium for a moment for announcements and closing remarks. First, I'd like to share some of the reasons why I feel very fortunate that we have had this talk. I feel very fortunate because we have had a world-leading expert explain to us something very complex. I feel very fortunate because every slide was exemplary. It boiled down so much knowledge in bits that we could all follow, and it really models, you know, what you can do for, say, an MA thesis, understanding there's 25 years of a career ahead of you, so no pressure, okay? That's the golden example. Doesn't mean that's the one we can all aspire to in a short period of time, but truly every slide given with expertise and clarity. You have the technical being folded into the big picture without being watered down. You redrew the maps of Latin America for us. For instance, did you all know that there's a country called Brazil Paraguay? In terms of energy, that is an entity. It is a country. We saw the difference between looking at a problem from the top down versus from the bottom up. From the bottom up, distribution is your life. Distribution is how much the electricity bill can go up or down. And that's one place to occupy within this complexity, and it's a different place to occupy when you are in the luxury of seeing things from the top down, the luxury and the disadvantage also, because you lose touch with some experience on the ground that, of course, you did justice to. We also saw current events in perspective, as I know Carlos and I were talking about this the other day. You may have heard Ecuador imitated the United States in doing this tariff move on from Colombia, demanding tariffs of Colombia, and then Colombia pretty much literally pulled the plug, stopped selling energy to Ecuador and to integrated energy systems, same as Brazil and Paraguay. Lo and behold, and we really understood that. It's in the news, but we have a lot more background here. Lastly, I also feel fortunate because, we appreciate that. I might editorialize here a bit. I'll indulge myself with that. I think studying economics in isolation is a problem. I like when people talk about political economy. They think about politics and economy together, whatever your persuasion is, right? I have a bit of a problem with thinking of economics as a pure science. Materialist. Now, here we have seen not just political economy, but political economy of energy and law. Political economy of energy and law as one comprehensive field of inquiry and research that is important to understand in that interconnection. I'll close these remarks leaving open questions. To echo Christian's question, I wonder what the bottom-up perspective would be from someone for whom the Magdalena River is known as Yuma, the indigenous name for the Magdalena River, and for whom the displacement of a river is an act of sacrilege, and it's a kind of moral damage, and is this an externality? Does not concern us, does not concern an engineer, or does it concern a policy maker? Does it concern industry? The 3 points of that triangle. This is all to say that I'm very excited and grateful. I also would like to leave the question of what economic system does electricity want? We know what economic system sugar wants, tobacco wants, oil wants. What economic system electricity wants? Our next speaker is going to be our esteemed colleague, Luxic scholar Carlos Manzano. And following in this really scintillating series of interdisciplinary talks, we are going to be treated to a lecture called The Chemistry of Inequality, Tracing Complex Contaminant Mixtures Across Chile. Let us please thank Professor Street. See you all soon.